Dr. Jibran, we're going to ask you a bunch of rapid fire questions. You've got 10 seconds to answer each one. As someone who studied neuroscience, you shouldn't have a problem in just making your brain work over time. So we're going to start with a few easy ones. Dr. Jibran is someone, mashallah, who's memorized the Quran. You've clearly listened to a lot of Quran as well. Who would you say your favorite reciter, qari of the Quran is?
As I was memorizing, I was listening to the Hudayfi tapes, so that's my OG. But right now, Sheikh Mahir al-Muwaqqili would be one that I enjoy listening to. But I think, in truth, what we end up listening most to right now is Sheikh Khalifa at-Tuneji. He has these audio for the kids where he recites once and a kid recites once, and so that's what we end up listening to most because that helps kids with the memorization, and so that's probably our go-to right now.
Fair enough. Jazakallah khair. And what's the last book that you were reading?
To be honest, I have probably not read a book in the last 3.5 years. Between reading for work and being a tenure track faculty member, I don't really get a chance to read much. So that's something that I'm missing in my life. And
you're the first guest on this show who's answered that in that fashion. And I'm so happy. I'm so proud, man, because it makes me feel better. Jazakallah khair. So someone comes up to you and says, or one of your kids, and says, Dad, which do you prefer I take, vape or weed? What's your response to him?
See, and that's where I have to do as I said and not, and so I don't blow up at him, first of all. And then I would say that, subhanAllah, vaping, I'd ask him, what do you want to vape? Because if, for example, the vape has nothing but flavor in it, that would definitely be the lesser of the two evils between that and weed. But if it was something more harmful, and these days you can vape anything, then maybe the weed would be the answer. But what I would tell them is, both have their harms, and I would try to talk them through the harms associated with both of them.
And they've done their research, and they come to you and say, look, there's no nicotine in this vape. It's pretty much just a more mature lollipop. You used to give us lollipops when we were younger. So what's the problem with vaping?
And also, vaping is an interesting thing right now, right? Like initially it was marketed as this harm reduction tool, and it remains that. For somebody who smokes, for them to now switch to vaping is much safer, right? Like it'll prevent cancer, it'll reduce harm. But what we need to realize is that that's not entirely a high bar, right? Like the exhaust fumes from your car are probably safer than cigarettes too. Right, so that's what we need to first tell them is that yes, everybody talks about the harm reduction and how vaping is safer than cigarettes, but vaping in itself, we don't actually know what the effects of it are. All of those chemicals, the hundreds of chemicals that are found in it, the propylene glycol, the vegetable glycerin, that's now being aerosolized and being deposited into your lungs. All of those will have effects. And in fact, just the vehicle itself, the propylene glycol and the vegetable glycerin, has been shown to be have abuse liability and addictive potential in animal studies. And so just that might make you addicted, even though if it's just flavor and has no nicotine in it. So there's all of those factors that would need to be considered. And I know I'm going longer than the rapid fire answers, but
no, that's fine. That's fine. A couple more related to the topic. If I was to ask, what's the worst thing that substance abuse does to the brain? And as someone who studied neuroscience, you could list several. What would be one thing that would give shock to me?
I would go more general and say that it changes your brain irreversibly. And your adolescence is a period of time where your brain is already going through many changes, and it's this period of brain maturation, and your synapses are changing, and your brain is now getting to its full adult stage. If used during this time, your brain will not be in the same shape it would have been if you hadn't used drugs. And so things are going to be changed and things are going to be different, and those are going to be irreversible changes for the most part. The amazing thing is if we can get somebody to quit smoking cigarettes within 6 months, within a year, within 5-10 years, the different risks for cardiovascular disease, cancer begin to come back down and start to look not too different from the general public. And that's why quitting is so awesome. But at the level of the brain, some of these changes are long lasting. And so your brain is going to be changed. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. Next one is, if I were to say, what's your dream breakfast? And as someone who's lived in Kuwait, I have to say, the food in Kuwait is second to none in the Middle East. What would your dream breakfast be?
I don't know. That's a tough question. Again, I think I'm one of those people that prefers lunch for breakfast. So I often find myself taking the leftovers from the day before and having those for breakfast as a later breakfast. So that's usually what I end up doing. So it would be whatever the yummy dinner I had last night. I think that, because like, why have something else when you could have the same yummy thing you had last night?
If you were to have that yummy thing at night with someone who is alive, and you could choose anyone to be with you at that dinner table who is alive, who would it be?
The honest response to that, as a parent of two 8 and 5-year-old, I'd love to go for a dinner with my wife without worrying about where the kids are or, feeling guilty for leaving them at home or with their grandparents. So I think that would be a good person. But if I'm thinking, bigger than that, I don't know.
It's a good answer, man. It's a good answer. Like, you don't need to change it.
Yeah,
it's good.
Okay, I'll stick with that one. It's been 8 years since I've had dinner in peace with my wife. Let's just put it that way.
Fair enough. And then, I was listening to your TED Talk, and you were saying, you were asking your question to your wife is like, why did we do this to ourselves?
Yeah, so the theme is consistent.
And then finally, there's so many I can go through here, but we'll end with this one. When I say embarrassing masjid story, what comes to mind in the life of Dr. Jibran?
Okay, so that same brother that came into the masjid for qiyam, smelling like cannabis, after the prayer, came and hugged me, and like I got a really strong whiff, and I don't know if I thought a lot about how should I bring this up, but I wasn't able to bring that conversation up at all. But that would be one story that's relevant to today. But aside from that, I as somebody who's had sleep apnea at points in my life, I think every time I do I'm in the masjid for a sleepover or during Ramadan for itikaf, people recording my snoring is another embarrassing thing that's something I've known about, and it usually gets passed around in WhatsApp groups, etc. So that would be an embarrassing thing that happened to me, I guess.
All right. We'll leave it there, Dr. Jibran. Jazakallah khair. And those of us who haven't read the paper, you can find it on yaqeeninstitute.org. It's called Talking to Teens About Drugs and Alcohol, a Quranic Approach. Dr. Jibran, Jazakallah khair and barakallah feek.
Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair for having me.